Single rancher found two Apache sisters freezing in the snow. Now they both want to be his wives. The wind hit like a fist. Cole Harmon had been riding through the San Pedro Valley for 3 hours when the storm turned mean. Snow came sideways. His horse, a big roan named Dust, dropped his head low and pushed forward because that was all either of them knew how to do. Cole pulled his coat tighter and scanned the white, nothing ahead. Nothing moved, nothing lived out here tonight. He was sure of that. Then Dust stopped. Cole didn't kick him. He had learned years ago that the horse knew things before he did. He leaned forward, narrowed his eyes against the wind, and saw them. Two figures, on the ground, half buried in a drift against a rocky outcrop. He was off Dust before he thought about it. His boots punched through the crust of snow, and he dropped to one knee beside the nearest shape. A woman. Young. Dark hair plastered against her face. Her lips had gone the color of a winter sky. He pressed two fingers to her throat and found a pulse, thin as thread but still pulling. He looked at the second figure. Same dark hair, smaller frame, also breathing. Barely. Cole Harmon was not a man who talked to himself, but he said one word into the storm. Lord. He got the smaller one over his shoulder first, carried her to Dust, and draped her across the saddle. Then he went back for the first. She was heavier with wet clothing, and his shoulders screamed by the time he had her up. He walked beside the horse, holding both women in place with his arms braced across them, and started the 2-mile push back toward his ranch. He did not think about who they were. He did not think about why two women were alone in the San Pedro Valley in the worst blizzard of the year. He thought only about the next step. Then the next. Dust leaned into the wind with him, steady and patient, and together they moved through the white dark like a single animal. His ranch came out of the storm slowly. First the fence line, then the barn's dark shape, then the yellow square of the bunkhouse window where he'd left a lamp burning out of habit. Though there had been no ranch hands since October, he took them inside, laid them on the two bunks closest to the stove, and started the fire with hands so cold he could barely grip the matches. The smaller one opened her eyes first. She looked at him from the bunk without moving. Her eyes were black and sharp, and even half-frozen there was nothing helpless in them. She took in the room, the stove, the lamp, Cole himself crouching by the fire with his back to her. Then she said something in a language he did not speak. He turned around. I don't understand, but you're safe. Both of you. She watched him. I'm Cole, he said. This is my place, he pointed at the stove. Warm. You understand warm? Something shifted in her expression. Not softness exactly, recognition maybe. She pushed herself up on one elbow and looked at the other bunk where her companion still lay. She spoke again, the same language, quicker this time, urgent. She's breathing, Cole said. He stood, moved to the second bunk, checked the pulse again. Still with us. The woman on the first bunk sat all the way up despite what it clearly cost her. She swung her legs over the side. She was going to stand. Cole took one step forward and she held up a hand. Not a gesture of fear, a command. He stopped. She made it to her feet and crossed to the second bunk under her own power and sat beside the other woman and took her hands. She spoke to her in a low, continuous voice. Cole stepped back and let them have the space. He went to the kitchen corner and put a pot of water on the stove and found the dried beef and cornbread he had left from supper. He did not know what he had pulled out of the snow. He did not know what kind of trouble had put them there. He knew they were alive because he had gone out to check his fence line at the wrong hour in the wrong weather, and that was enough to work with for now. The second woman's eyes opened near midnight. She was older than he had first thought. Not by years, but by something harder to name. She looked at the ceiling of his bunkhouse and then at the woman beside her, and something broke across her face and then sealed back up fast. She pressed the younger woman's hands and spoke quietly. Then she looked at Cole. He was sitting at the small table with a cup of coffee, giving them room. He nodded once. She nodded back. He pushed the plate of food toward the center of the table without a word and went back to his coffee. She woke the younger one. They ate. Cole refilled their cups with water. Then coffee when they reached for his cup and looked at it with curiosity. He set out 2 cups, poured, left them to it. Outside, the storm hit the walls of the bunkhouse like it had a grudge. Inside, the stove ticked and the lamp held steady. and three people who had no language in common sat in the same room and breathed the same warm air. Cole eventually lay down on the floor near the stove with his saddle blanket and his coat over him. He was asleep in 4 minutes. The two women watched him for a while. The older one said something quiet to the younger. The younger one looked at Cole's sleeping shape for a long time. Then she said something back, just as quiet. The older one did not answer. She just watched the fire. Cole woke to the smell of something cooking. He sat up fast, hand moving toward his belt out of old habit, and found both women standing at his stove. The older one had found his cast iron pan and his salt pork, and was working them with a competence that said she had cooked over fire her whole life. The younger one was at the window, watching the dawn come pale and thin over the snow. She heard him move and turned. She said something. When he looked blank, she made a gesture with her hands, sweeping outward toward the window, and shook her head. "Still bad out there?" he said. She nodded once. Apparently she had figured that much out overnight. Cole ran a hand over his face and stood and put on his hat by reflex even indoors. He looked at the pan. Salt pork and cornbread crumbled into it, crisped at the edges. His stomach pulled hard toward it. "That smells better than anything I've made in 2 months," he said. The older woman glanced at him over her shoulder. He pointed at the pan and gave the closest thing to a smile he had in him this early. She turned back to the stove without expression, but he noticed she didn't scrape any of the good crust off before she served it. They ate at the table, all three. It was a strange thing, sitting there with the storm still going, and the daylight the color of old bone, eating pan-cooked salt pork with two Apache women whose names he didn't know. Cole was not a man who found silence uncomfortable. He had lived alone on this ranch for 4 years and had grown to prefer the quiet. But this was a different kind of quiet. Loaded. He pointed at himself. "Cole." The older woman looked at him steadily. Then she touched her own chest. "Nalin," he said it back. She didn't correct him, so he must have got it close enough. She pointed at the younger woman. "Kaya." Kaya was already watching him when he looked at her. She had the same black eyes as her sister, the same economy of expression, but something quicker underneath it. Something that caught things and turned them over before deciding. "Cole," she repeated, pointing at him. Her accent bent the word into something slightly different and not worse. "That's right," he said. She seemed to find this satisfactory. She went back to her food. After breakfast, the snow was still coming but lighter. Cole pulled on his coat and went to check on Dust and the 2 other horses in the barn. And when he came back, he found Nalin had washed the pan and the cups with water from the pot and set them to dry on the shelf exactly where they had been before. Kaya was mending a tear in her sleeve with thread she had found somewhere in the bunkhouse, working with small, precise stitches. He stood in the doorway for a moment. Neither woman looked up, but Kaya said something without raising her eyes from her work, and Nalin answered from across the room. And Cole had the clear and specific feeling that he was the subject of the conversation. He pulled his hat brim down and went to check the fence lines. The snow had dropped 4 feet in the northwest pasture and taken a section of fence with it. Cole spent the next 3 hours digging out posts and stringing new wire with fingers that went numb and then stopped telling him they were numb, which was worse. He worked steadily. The cold didn't bother him the way it did most men, or if it did, he had long since decided that mentioning it didn't change the temperature. When he got back to the barn at midday, he found Kaya there. She was brushing dust. The big roan was standing with his eyes half closed and the expression of a man having his back scratched in exactly the right place. Kaya worked the brush in long strokes, speaking to the horse in low Apache words, and Dust's ear twitched toward her voice like he was trying to understand. Cole stopped in the barn door. She knew he was there. He was sure of that. She kept brushing. He crossed to his other horses, checked their feet, refilled their water and grain. He worked on his side of the barn, and she worked on hers. After a while, she said something. He looked over. She pointed at Dust's near foreleg. Then she crouched, ran her hand down it slowly, and looked up at him. He came over, crouched beside her, ran his own hand down the same line. There it was, a faint heat and the beginning of swelling just above the fetlock. He hadn't caught it this morning, she had. "Good eye," he said. She didn't understand the words. She understood the tone. She nodded once and stood, and went back to brushing, and Cole went to find his liniment. By the time the short winter afternoon started going dark, they had settled into a kind of working arrangement that none of them had discussed. Nalin cooked. Cole split firewood and stacked it by the door. Kaya moved between tasks with a quiet efficiency, anticipating what needed doing next in a way that Cole found both useful and slightly unnerving, because he was not used to anyone reading the shape of his day well enough to step into it. At supper, Nalin set 3 plates, and Cole poured water for all of them without thinking about it. Kaya caught him looking at Nalin's hands while she worked and raised an eyebrow at him, just one, in a way that asked a question he couldn't quite parse. He looked back at his plate. After supper, he drew a rough map in the dirt near the stove with a stick, a circle for the ranch, a line for the river, a rough shape for the mountains. He pointed at both women and raised his eyebrows. Nalin leaned forward. She took the stick from him with a directness that surprised him and drew a mark northeast of his circle. A small shape. She said something. "Your camp," he said. She said something else. Kaya spoke. Nalin shook her head and drew an X through the mark she had made and looked at Cole. Gone, he figured. The camp was gone. Whether from the storm or from something worse, he could not tell from her face, because her face did not give things away easily. But Kaya was looking at the X, and something moved in her expression, and was gone just as fast. And Cole understood that, whatever had happened to their camp, it had not been only the weather. He sat back. He was quiet for a moment, then he pointed at the circle that meant his ranch, and kept his hand there. Both women looked at him. He kept his hand on the circle and held their eyes and did not look away. Nalin looked at Kaya. Kaya looked at the map. Then she looked at Cole with those sharp, dark eyes that turned things over before deciding, and whatever she decided, she kept it to herself. But she didn't reach for the stick to draw anything else. The storm shook the walls of the bunkhouse, and the lamp held steady inside, and nobody said a word, and Cole thought that for now, that was answer enough. 3 days passed and the snow stopped falling but didn't go anywhere. The valley was buried. Cole's fence lines disappeared under white. The trail to town was a memory. The nearest neighbor, old Pete Garvey, was 6 miles east and might as well have been on the moon. Cole had enough salt pork, cornmeal, dried beans and coffee to last a month if they were careful. He did the math without making a thing of it, and concluded they were fine. What he could not calculate was the other thing that was happening in his bunkhouse. Nalin had commandeered his kitchen. There was no other word for it. She had found where he kept things, rearranged them in a way that made slightly more sense than his arrangement, and now cooked every meal with the authority of a woman who had been feeding people her entire life. The food was better than anything Cole produced. He said so. She received this information with the same expression she received most information. Kaya had taken over the horses. She was in the barn every morning before Cole, and the horses, all 3 of them, had relaxed into a contentment he hadn't seen from them since summer. She talked to them constantly in Apache, and they listened, with the devoted attention of animals that understood they were being addressed seriously. She worked Dust's bad leg with liniment twice a day. The swelling was already coming down. Cole watched all of this and said nothing, and understood he was watching 2 people who knew exactly how to work and exactly how to make themselves useful, and were doing both things with a deliberateness that was not accidental. On the 4th morning, he came in from the barn to find Kaya and Nalin in a conversation that stopped when he entered. Not guiltily, just completely. They looked at him. He looked at them. He poured his coffee and sat down. Nalin spoke. Her voice had a declarative quality even in a language he didn't understand. She pointed at herself, at Kaya, at the ranch around them. Then she said something that ended with a rising inflection. He looked at Kaya. Kaya pulled the dirt stick map from where it had been leaning against the wall. She laid it on the table. She pointed at their X mark, their destroyed camp. She pointed at the mountains northeast. She swept her hand across the mountains slowly and looked at him. Cole understood. She was asking if there was anywhere else for them to go. He thought about it honestly. It was not a small question. The Apache bands had been pushed and pressed, and had their lands taken for 30 years. He didn't know what had happened to their camp, but he knew enough about the territory to know that whatever it was probably not unique. A lone Apache man might make his way. Two Apache women alone in San Pedro Valley in winter had very few good options, and Cole was sitting at the table looking at the face of one of them. He pointed at the ranch circle again. He held two fingers up, then he pointed at both women. Kaya watched him. He pointed at the loft of the bunkhouse that he'd never used for anything but storing old tack, then at the small room off the back that had a door and a window and a bunk he'd built for a ranch hand he never hired. He was offering them real shelter. Not the bunkhouse floor, real rooms. He pointed at himself and then outside toward the main house, 40 feet across the yard, where he slept. Nalin spoke to Kaya. Kaya answered. There was a pause in the conversation that Cole had learned to leave alone. Then Nalin stood. She walked to the back room door and opened it and looked inside. She came back. She sat down. She said something to Cole directly, something short, and the tone of it was not a question. All right then, Cole said. He didn't know exactly what she'd said, but he was fairly sure they had just made an arrangement, and he was fairly sure that all three of them understood it the same way. He finished his coffee and went back to the barn. What he did not understand, what he could not see from where he sat, was that the conversation between the two sisters had been longer and more complicated than the few words he'd witnessed. It had started the night before, after he'd gone to the main house. It had covered ground that had nothing to do with shelter in rooms and winter survival. Kaya had watched Cole Harmon for 4 days. She was a person who watched carefully before she spoke, and who spoke carefully after she had watched. And what she had seen was a man who went into a blizzard to check a fence line and came home with two strangers on his horse, without hesitating. A man who slept on his own floor in the cold so they could have the bunks. A man who noticed Dust's leg before she pointed at it, but said nothing about having missed it. A man who drew a map in the dirt and put his hand on his own land and offered it without conditions, and without the expression men usually wore when they thought they were doing someone a favor. She had told Nalin this. Nalin had listened. Nalin was 31 and had been watching men make decisions about women's lives her entire life. She was slower to the conclusion than Kaya, not because she saw less, but because she had seen more. He is one man, Nalin had said. Yes, Kaya said. We are two women. Yes. Nalin was quiet for a while. Outside, the snow had settled into that deep, windless silence that only comes after a storm has finished being angry. His hands, Nalin said finally. She had watched Cole's hands the way Kaya had watched his face. They go to the work before his mind does. That is an honest man. Kaya said nothing. She already knew this. Nalin looked at the younger sister in the lamplight and understood that Kaya had already gone somewhere in her thinking, somewhere ahead of Nalin's cautious assessment, and had been waiting for Nalin to catch up. We are not in a position to be particular, Nalin said. But even as she said it, she knew it was not the whole truth. They were not choosing Cole Harmon because they had no options. They were noting that of all the options available to two Apache women in a broken territory in the winter of 1883, this particular option had a quality that most options did not. He had not, even once, looked at either of them the way men usually looked. That fact was doing considerable work in Nalin's thinking. When Cole came back from the barn the following morning, he found a fresh pot of coffee, 2 plates already made and covered, and both women gone. He was on his feet and moving for the door before he finished the thought, and then he saw them through the window. They were in the yard. Kaya was showing Nalin something about the fence post structure along the north side of the barn. Nalin was looking at it with her head tilted, the expression of someone learning a new thing. The cold was significant. Neither woman seemed to mind it. Cole watched them from the window for a moment. Just a moment. Then he turned back to his coffee and picked up his fork. He was not a man who tried to name things before they were ready to be named. What was happening on his ranch was not ready yet. He had 4 walls and a stove and enough food, and 2 women in his yard who were not looking at him like they were waiting to be told what to do. That was more than enough to work with. He ate his breakfast. Outside, the snow lay over everything in the long blue light of morning, and somewhere north of the barn, Kaya's voice said something sharp, and Nalin laughed once, low and brief, like she hadn't expected to. Cole heard it through the wall. He did not look up from his plate, but his coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth and stayed there for just a beat too long. Word reached town before the snow melted. Cole didn't know how. He hadn't been to Calvary Creek since October, and neither had anyone within 6 miles. And yet when he finally hitched Dust to the wagon and made the trip in late January, he knew from the way Pete, Garvey's boy, stared at him from the feed store door that something had gotten there ahead of him. He went to the feed store first, the way he always did, and set his list on the counter in front of a man named Dolan, who had run the place for 15 years, and who had the specific talent of making ordinary conversation feel like an interrogation. "Heard you had some company this winter," Dolan said, writing up the order without looking at him. "Had a hard storm," Cole said. That you did, Dolan wrote. "Apache women," someone said. "Someone talks too much," Cole said. Dolan looked up at that. He seemed to be deciding whether Cole was being hostile or simply accurate. He decided on accurate and went back to the list. "People are curious is all. A man living alone out on the San Pedro takes in 2 Indian women. People are going to have opinions." "People can have whatever they like," Cole said. "Just write up the order." The order was written. Cole loaded the wagon. He was at the hardware store when the next one started. The hardware man was named Aldous Frey, younger than Dolan and less careful. "They still out there?" Aldous said, meaning it to sound casual and missing by a distance. Cole looked at him across the counter. "You selling me those hinges or not?" Aldous sold him the hinges. Cole went to the post office and found a letter from his brother in Santa Fe, asking about the ranch and saying nothing of consequence. He was putting it in his coat pocket when a man he didn't know fell into step beside him on the boardwalk. Medium height, new coat, the kind of face that was handsome once and was now just confident. "You're Harmon," the man said. "I am. Name's Calder, Denton Calder. I'm with the land office." Cole kept walking. "All right. Got a few questions about your property out on the San Pedro." "Send a letter." "Rather do it in person." Calder matched his pace without any difficulty, which meant he was used to following men who didn't want to be followed. "There have been some concerns raised about the nature of your current living situation." Cole stopped walking. He turned and looked at Calder with a directness that made the land office man take half a step back before he caught himself. "The nature of my living situation," Cole said, "is that it's mine. Is there something specific the land office needs from me? Or are you just carrying other people's curiosity for them?" Calder straightened. "There are legal considerations. Harboring individuals who may be considered wards of the federal government, that's not a simple thing." "Those women are guests on my property," Cole said. "They nearly froze to death in the storm. I pulled them out of a drift on my own land. If you'd like to argue with that in a court, you go ahead and find yourself a judge willing to hear it." He said this quietly. He said everything quietly. It was a habit that had taken years to develop, and it was one of his better ones, because there was something in the softness of it that was harder to argue with than shouting. Calder said nothing. Cole turned and continued to the wagon. He loaded the last of his supplies and checked Dust's harness and was about to climb up when he felt a presence on the boardwalk behind him. He turned and found a woman standing there, maybe 60 years old, in a dark coat and sensible boots, with the expression of a person who had made up their mind about something some time ago. "I'm Ada Fitch," she said. "I run the school." "I know who you are," Cole said. He'd seen her in town a dozen times over 4 years, though they'd never spoken. "Those women," she said. "Are they all right?" He looked at her. "They're fine." Ada Fitch nodded slowly. "Good. That was a bad storm." She paused. "People are going to make this difficult for you. I noticed. They'll go after your land grant eventually. Claim you're in violation of something. They've done it before to men who were inconvenient." She said this without apology or dramatics, the way a person states a known fact. "I don't say this to frighten you. I say it because you should know what's coming so you can prepare." Cole looked at her for a long moment. "Why are you telling me this?" Ada Fitch looked back at him with the patience of a woman who had been teaching for 30 years. "Because you did the right thing in that storm. And right things are expensive in this territory. And you deserve to know the price before you're surprised by the bill." She turned and walked back toward the school without waiting for a response. Cole watched her go. He climbed up onto the wagon and clicked Dust into motion. And on the long ride back through the valley, he thought about what was coming. Not with dread. With the same clean practicality he brought to broken fence lines and hard weather and the other honest problems of his life. Something was coming. That was true. It had been true since he put his hand on that map and kept it there. He had kept it there anyway. When he came over the last rise and his ranch came into view, he saw smoke rising from the main house, which he hadn't started a fire in that morning. He pulled dust up for a moment and looked at it, thin and straight in the cold air. Someone had decided the main house needed a fire. He thought about that for a moment. Then he clicked dust forward and went home. Kaya heard the wagon before she saw it. She was in the barn working Dust's replacement rein that had cracked in the cold when the creak and rhythm of wheels reached her. She set the leather down and moved to the barn door and watched Cole Harmon drive into the yard with his wagon loaded and his hat pulled against the cold and his face carrying the particular expression he wore when he had been thinking about something unpleasant and had decided on a course of action anyway. She had been reading his face for 3 weeks. She went to help unload. Nayland came out of the main house, which she had entered for the first time that morning, on the logic that it was wasteful to heat only the bunkhouse and not the main structure, which was larger and better built. She had swept it, built a fire, and taken an inventory of what Cole Harmon owned, which was not much but was solid, and she had found herself standing in the middle of his kitchen, with her arms folded, thinking about a thing she had not expected to think about. Cole handed down a sack of cornmeal. Nayland took it without being asked and carried it inside. Kaya took the other end of a crate and walked it to the barn. Cole came alongside her, and they set it down together inside the barn door. He stood for a moment, hands on his knees, looking at Dust's leg where Kaya had put fresh liniment on it that morning. "Town was interesting," he said. Kaya looked at him. "There's a man from the land office who's going to be trouble," he said. "And some others besides." He straightened. He said it the way he said all difficult things. Level and clear, without the drama of a man who wanted to be told not to worry. "I want you to know what's out there so you can make your own decisions about it." Kaya was quiet for a moment. Then she said, in plain English, 2 words that Cole would have bet a year's wages she didn't know. "We stay." He looked at her directly. She was looking back. "You speak English," he said. "Some," she said. Cole pulled his hat brim down. The corner of his mouth moved in a way that on anyone else would have been a smile. "How much is some?" Kaya tilted her head slightly. "Enough." He nodded once. He went to check on the roan. Kaya picked up the reins she'd been working and went back to the leather, and neither of them said anything else. And the barn was warm with animal heat, and the smell of hay, and the sound of the wind outside doing what wind did. And for now, for today, the 3 walls around them held it all at bay. The land office sent a formal notice in February. Cole read it at his kitchen table, with both women there, which he hadn't planned, but which happened because they had stopped treating the kitchen as something to be in only when invited. He read it twice, set it down, and pushed it to the center of the table. Nayland looked at it. She couldn't read English, but she had an excellent understanding of documents. She had seen enough of them in her life to know that a document arriving from a government office was almost never good news. She said something to Kaya. Kaya picked it up. Her English reading was slow and careful, and Cole watched her work through it without rushing her. After a while, she set it down. "They want you to prove," she said, working through the words, "that we are not illegal persons on your land." "That's about right," Cole said. "What does this mean?" "It means I need to go see a lawyer," he said, "which I was going to do anyway." He rode to Calvary Creek the next morning before dawn. The lawyer was a man named Holt Brennan, who had an office above the barber shop, and who was, in Cole's estimation, one of maybe 4 honest men in the county. Cole laid the notice on his desk, and Brennan read it and took his glasses off and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "You know what they're doing," Brennan said. "I know what they're trying to do," Cole said. "It's Calder and the men behind him. They want your grant. You're sitting on 40 square miles of good water access, and they have been wanting it since you filed." Brennan leaned back. "The women are the pretext. They'll claim you're violating federal regulations on Indian custody and use that to challenge the validity of your occupancy. Can they?" "They can try." Brennan put his glasses back on. The question is whether you're willing to fight it, because fighting it will cost you time and money and aggravation, and they are counting on you deciding it's not worth it. Cole sat with that for a moment. Is it worth it? Brennan looked at him over the glasses. That depends on what you're defending. Cole thought of the smoke rising from the main house chimney when he'd come over the rise. He thought of Kaya's hands working a cracked rein with the same attention she gave everything she touched. He thought of Nalin standing in his kitchen with her arms folded, taking inventory of his life. And the expression on her face, that was not judgment but something closer to consideration. It's worth it, he said. Brennan nodded. He reached for his pen. The legal fight that followed was not dramatic in the way that stories sometimes make legal fights dramatic. It was paper and rides to town, and depositions taken in Brennan's small office above the barber shop, with Cole answering questions in his level, quiet way, and Brennan writing carefully, and the whole thing moving at the pace of a creek in late summer. Slow and inevitable. Calder came out to the ranch once. It was a cold morning in February, and he brought 2 other men with him, both with the look of men who expected their presence to produce a particular effect. Cole met them in the yard. Nalin watched from the main house window. Kaya was in the barn, and Cole knew she could hear everything from there, which was its own form of comfort. I'm giving you a chance to resolve this without a hearing, Calder said. He stood at a distance that was meant to be official. If you can demonstrate that these women are lawfully present on your property, we have no issue. They're guests, Cole said. The federal government classifies Apache individuals as wards of the state. Their presence on private land without documentation from the appropriate agency is a violation. Then let's let a judge say that, Cole said. I'll be interested to hear it. Calder looked at him the way men looked at Cole when they had expected a different reaction and didn't know what to do with the one they'd gotten. You understand this isn't only about the women. I understand perfectly what it's about, Cole said. The 2 men behind Calder shifted their weight. Cole stood without moving, without heat, without the aggression that would have given them something to work with. He was simply there, in the cold morning, in front of his own gate, unmoved. Calder left. That night Cole sat at his table with his coffee, and the sound of Nalin and Kaya, talking in the main room that had become their room, their conversations low and steady, and occasionally broken by something that was almost laughter. He had started to be able to pick out individual words in Apache without knowing what they meant. The shape of Kaya's voice was different from Nalin's, lower and faster, with a rhythm that caught and ran. Nalin's voice had more stops in it. He did not examine why he had this information. He went to bed. In the morning there was a folded piece of paper on his kitchen table. He opened it. It was not in English and not in Apache. It was a drawing done in pencil with a precision that he would not have expected from a stick. 3 shapes. 1 taller, 2 side by side and slightly smaller. Around them lines that were fence lines, and a shape that was a barn, and a circle that was clear. They were inside the circle. Cole looked at it for a long time. He folded it carefully and put it in his shirt pocket and wore it there all day. Brennan sent word in March that the land office challenge was being withdrawn. Cole read the letter twice, went out to the yard, stood in the thin spring sun for a moment, and then went back inside and told both women in plain words what it said. Nalin listened, arms folded, and when he finished she nodded once, the kind of nod that closes a subject and moves to the next thing. Kaya looked at him with the expression she wore when she was deciding something. He had come to recognize that expression the way you recognize weather. She said something to Nalin. Nalin answered without looking at either of them. Cole waited. Kaya looked at him directly. Her English by March was considerably better than enough. We have talked, she said, about this question. All right, Cole said. Nalin and I. She paused, choosing the words with the same care she chose everything. We are not helpless women. We do not ask to be kept. I know that, Cole said. But this is a place, she said. A real place. She said the word real with a weight that told him what it cost to say it. We have not had a real place in a long time. Cole said nothing. He understood that she was not finished. Nalin thinks you are a careful man, Kaya said. I think you are a good one. These are not always the same thing. She paused again. We think they are both true of you. The main house fire crackled. Outside, Cole's land ran to the fence lines and past them, 40 miles of grass and water and sky that men had tried to take from him and failed. Cole looked at both women, at Nalin, who was not quite looking at him, but whose whole posture was attending, and at Kaya, whose eyes were steady and waiting. "I'm not a man with a lot of words," he said. "But I'll say this plain." He set his coffee cup down. "I have not been glad to live alone. I have been used to it. Those are different things too." He was quiet for a moment. "This ranch is mine, and if you'll have it, it's yours, both of you." He was careful not to say more than he meant. He was also careful to say exactly what he meant. Nayland looked at him then, directly, the full weight of those careful eyes. She looked for long enough that Cole's coffee got cold. Then she spoke in Apache. Kaya translated just the one word. "Yes, the spring came fast that year, faster than any spring Cole had seen in the valley. The grass came up green and sudden. The creek ran full." Cole fixed the northwest fence with Kaya working alongside him, the two of them quiet and efficient in the easy way of people who have learned the rhythm of each other's work. Nalin grew a garden against the south wall of the main house. She did not ask if this was permitted. She simply did it, with seeds she had requested from Aldous Frey's store, and with a seriousness that told Cole the garden was not a small thing to her. He built a proper frame for it, one Sunday afternoon, to keep the rabbits out. He built it quietly, without saying what he was doing or why. Nalin came out, looked at it, and went back inside. Later he found fresh cornbread on the kitchen table, and nobody else in the house. Ada Fitch came out to the ranch in April, riding a mule, and wearing the same dark coat and sensible boots, and sat at Cole's table and drank coffee, and talked to Nayland and Kaya with the frank directness of a woman who had no patience for performing comfort. She was learning Apache, and they were learning English, and between Kaya's translation and Ada's willingness to try wrong words until the right ones arrived, they managed a real conversation. When Ada left, she gripped Nayland's hand at the door and said something Cole didn't catch. Nayland looked at the schoolteacher for a moment, and then said something back. Ada rode away on her mule, and Nayland stood in the doorway watching her go, and Cole saw something in the set of Nayland's shoulders that he had not seen there before. Not soft, not fragile, something steadier than that. Something that knew it was standing on ground that held. Cole came up beside her and looked out at the valley, green now and warm at the edges of the day, and his fence lines intact from one end of his property to the other. Nayland said something without looking at him. "I don't understand," he said. She turned and looked at him with the fullness of her expression, the one she kept back most of the time. "I know," she said, in English, the first English she had said directly to him. Then she turned back to the valley. Cole stood beside her and said nothing, and watched the afternoon light come gold across the grass. And the thing that was happening here at the end of the San Pedro Valley, this strange and unplanned and solid thing, held its shape in the warm spring air like something that had always intended to be exactly this. Kaya came out of the barn behind them, her hands still carrying the smell of liniment and hay, and stood on Cole's other side, and the three of them watched the light go. There were no more men from the land office. The garden grew, Dust's leg healed clean, and Cole Harmon, who had ridden into a blizzard alone to check a fence line, and had come back with more than he had left with, sat on his own porch that first warm night of spring with coffee going cold in his hand, and two women talking quietly in his kitchen. And he thought about the word home and how he had lived inside it for 4 years without knowing what it actually meant. He knew now. He finished his coffee and went inside and closed the door against the dark.